If you were active on YouTube during the last couple of months of 2020, you may have been recommended a series of songs with no title, by one of two channels also with no name. Despite the inability to search for the titles of these songs, these channels have managed to gain a massive audience, purely from the YouTube algorithm and I suppose word of mouth. Or maybe not. If you thought this couldn't get any stranger, the people who have had this channel recommended to them have gone as far as to recognize it as an initiation into a cult, swearing their members into secrecy about the videos. Their name? Well, they don't even have one. For the videos themselves, they consist of vocaloid / Utau original songs and covers, most of them bit pop inspired. The first channel, that I'll just be calling X, seems to be dedicated to posting songs using the creator's own original Utau, while the secondary channel seems to serve as a base for covers, typically using Utau Utane or vocaloids like Flower Miku. Now, I'm certainly not the first person to cover the work of X, but I felt like these videos didn't spend enough time on the most interesting question here. Why? Why go through all this effort to hide yourself? You might say that it's a marketing ploy, and while that's not a bad assumption, it couldn't be any further from the truth. If you were doing this to bring attention to yourself, then why go any further than just removing the names on the videos? What purpose would it serve to hide your name on both accounts, or any information about your background? Things clearly imposing your ability to gain recognition. And on top of that, they're not the only ones who have followed in this trend. There seems to be a whole Utau community forming around it. You see, this couldn't just be some random ploy by one channel. There had to be a purpose or inspiration behind it. And it turns out the answer to that question is a lot closer than you may think. Coincidentally, the first video uploaded by X held all the answers. A cover of a song that would spark this whole movement, by a producer whose name can no longer be spoken. Utau and vocaloid are like two sides of the same coin. While it would be wrong to consider them the same thing, it's hard to deny that one wasn't pivotal for the growth of the other. After all, the rise of Kasane Taito was a result of her being a parody of a vocaloid character. But fast forward to the present, and who knows where vocaloid would be today without it. The ability to take any pre-existing vocals and manipulate them to create your own vocal banks was an unbelievably powerful tool that naturally encouraged users to experiment with these programs. Not to mention, unlike Vocaloid, the shareware approach that Mie took meant that anyone with an internet connection could essentially use these programs, opening up endless possibilities for vocal synthesized music, while simultaneously extending the public's interest in the medium as well. Though I think most people will look at this process as an unneeded challenge. After all, why take the time to make your own when you could just use someone else's? But what the best producers in this field realize is that Utau offered them full creative freedom. With the right amount of energy, time, and patience, it very much had the potential to far exceed anything that Vocaloid was capable of. You want to create a vocal bank using your own voice? You can do that. You want to make a SpongeBob cover of a cute? You can do that as well. Because in a field with unlimited possibilities, any idea or vision can technically become a reality. And that's exactly what happened for a small producer that went by the alias of Kuromba. Kuromba was an internet personality that became vastly popular for his Utau work, and I use the word personality here instead of producer because Kuromba, like many, wasn't just defined by his work on Nico Nico. From indie game development to making various albums and even publishing a web manga, Kuromba was the type of person that didn't create boundaries on what was possible. Instead, he chose to actively experiment. By the time he started working as an Utau producer, he had already published 2 full games, an album, and dozens upon dozens of tracks prior. He wasn't just experienced, he was a veteran, and it showed in every song he released. Synth leads that danced across your ears, weirdly charming vocal inflections, instrumentals so carefully layered that the sound seemed to envelop you while you listened. And of course, who could forget the powerhouse behind that unique sound? Kuromba Yongol, his vocal bank that quickly became synonymous with his music. Sometimes referred to as the Seafood series, each of these 4 songs pushed what was possible for electronic music on Nico Nico. And even though Kurumba would only serve as a producer for a period shorter than 2 years, every synth, chime, and whistle seemed so meticulously well balanced that it created this impression that every note had to serve a purpose for him, that he needed that 1.5 year period just to produce these 4 tracks. And I think that's a major reason why, years later, each song that was published in this series is still widely influential and remembered to this day. It was clear to many that Kurumba had a real gift for composition that few could match. But what even made Kurumba so significant in the first place? Just what did he do in those years prior that made him a cut above the rest? Well, as I mentioned earlier, Kurumba's discography expanded well past just these 4 songs. And while his Utau work could be described as bright, vibrant, and upbeat, this high-energy electropop was actually a massive departure from his previous work. Kurumba built his legacy off a genre of music called IDM, or Intelligent Dance Music. It's a genre born from the UK electronic and rave scenes of the late 80s, like acid house or breakbeat. I know it's hard to believe that rave music of all things could aspire something so calm and relaxing, but all the elements were right there. The looping vocal samples, the thin-sounding electronics, the heavy percussion. Pioneers of this genre like Richard E. James, better known for his alias of Aphex Twin, were heavily influenced by this kind of music, and it would lead to some of the most important electronic music of all time. Kurumba's style leaned heavily on this early era electronic music too. His music is soaked in the techno and house roots that built this genre, favoring repetition and beat-oriented ambient tracks. In fact, Kurumba became so talented at this approach that he could limit himself to a handful of samples and still make cohesive melodies out of them. But by far the most valuable thing that IDM would provide for Kurumba's early career was versatility. This wasn't a genre that adhered to any set characteristics like jazz or rock. Instead, it was built on individual experimentation. Some of the best examples of this were Kurumba's albums and later compilations. They're all IDM projects, but notice how each one sounds so distinctly unique. Rain is a collection of light, atmospheric IDM tracks, while Tranquilizer's sound almost sounds like a mixture between his later electropop style, just with an IDM twist. Meanwhile, A Fish's Night sounds exactly how his cover looks. Dark, wavy, ambient tracks that simultaneously make you feel like you're in the depths of the ocean. It's apparent the more Kurumba kept composing, the more he was willing to experiment with his sound. And I think it's only a natural conclusion that someone with a talent to make deeply immersive and atmospheric music will want to try their hand at game development as well. A few years back, I went through a huge RPG Maker phase. For those unfamiliar, RPG Maker is a series of engines that began released in the 90s for the intention of creating your own RPGs. Though in actuality, due to how relatively cheap and easy the engine was to use, RPGs were far from the only thing being made with this engine. Horror games, point-and-click adventures, you name it. The engine was surprisingly flexible, and as a result, a large community of creators started to form around it. Now, games made with this engine certainly aren't the highest budget projects you'll ever see, but some of the best games that I've played in recent memory have been made with some version of this engine. Off, To the Moon, Lisa the Painful RPG. But one of my favorites, and possibly the most influential of them all, is a title called Yume Nikki. It's hard for me to put into words what kind of game Yume Nikki is for someone who hasn't played it before, but that's part of the reason why I love it so much. At the time, there really wasn't anything quite like it. You see, there are no real enemies, dialogue, or even a story in Yume Nikki. The only objective being to explore these 12 doors sitting in the Nexus, and to find the 24 effects scattered throughout this bizarre dream world. And I think some people will be instantly turned off by the concept of that, which I can completely understand. If you're someone who's used to having a written story or some sort of indicated direction in your games, then the idea of just aimlessly wandering around might bore you to tears. But playing through this game taught me something important about game design. That sometimes just creating a unique atmosphere can be more than enough to entertain an audience. And that all begins with your sound direction and music. Most of the soundtrack is made of these short repetitive loops, ranging from ambient to psychedelic or even melancholic. At first, this sounds more annoying than it does beneficial, but let me assure you, it's a vital component to this game's success. Combined with the surreal dark imagery that the game became famous for, it makes each area feel completely immersive. Long hallways feel oppressive and claustrophobic. Snowy landscapes become cold and desolate. Not a single track ever misses a beat at making you feel alone and uncomfortable. The discomfort, the unpredictability, the constant oppression, it all results in a world that feels completely alien and foreign. The kind of title where a creator must be completely confident in their ability to compose, or the project would just fall apart. A concept that worked perfectly for Cromba. Take its title Acor for example. It's as bare bones as a game gets. The art is simplistic, the story is non-existent, and the only real gameplay is slowly walking left and right, looking for the right path forward. Yet I felt myself more drawn into this world than some games with a AAA budget, and that's because this title succeeds in one important area: its soundtrack. When you play through the early levels, the music almost has this wavy rain texture to it. It makes you feel like you're underneath the water. The pitter-patter of the beat is reminiscent of air bubbles or maybe a school of fish swimming by. The track in general just gives off this faint sensation of warmth, like sunlight breaking through the surface of water. But the further into the depths you go, the more oppressive the tracks become. The beat slows down, the sound becomes more muted and faint. It hits with the pressure of a whole body of water resting on your shoulders, as the music turns more hostile and unfamiliar to the ear. While Acor might have just been a side project for Cromba, it proves something vastly important. Cromba had an extraordinary ability to convey emotion through his music, a talent that would greatly shape his best known project, a Yume Nikki fan game that I like to call LCD Dem. If Yume Nikki was a game that wanted to explore the negativities and deep horrors hidden within the mind, then LCD Den was a game that ambitiously asked the direct opposite. How far will the mind go to protect us? The first thing you might notice about this game is its bizarre environmental design. Half of these areas are filled with warm, vivid colors, fresh greenery, and a general embrace for the calming allures of nature. Yet the other is deeply rooted in the psychological horror and abstract imagery that you would expect from something like Yume Nikki. And there's something deeply unsettling about that. How these warm and inviting areas can feel so barren and empty. That one moment you could be walking a grassy field, only to end up in a dark labyrinth. It's like these peaceful areas are a facade for something much darker. Like stepping off the stage of a play, the further you go back into this world, the more simplistic and disconnected these areas become. You climb up monotone buildings that stretch past the skylines, walk across rusted bridges surrounded by dark gray skies, encounter tenants and animals that are only mere shadows. It paints the picture of an unstable mind, one that's barely keeping itself together. But it's only when these areas are combined with this game's soundtrack that you truly get something unforgettable. It's the way the dark greens of the lily garden seem to resonate with the slow groans of the bass, or the somber melancholy added to the red sky by the distortion of the backing track. One of my personal favorites is the background music for the stained glass world. The airy notes that echo off into the distance just seem to perfectly complement the beautiful arrangement of colors on its starry night landscape. It fills me with that same warmth I get looking at Christmas lights during the dead of winter. They often say that LCD Dem has one of the best soundtracks out of any Yume Nikki fan game. And in my opinion, it's rightfully earned. Because Cromba created music that told a story, every emotion and feeling carefully conveyed through the notes he wrote, making LCD Dem more than just a game, it encapsulated everything that would turn him into a legend. And that's exactly what makes it so tragic that this game is no longer available. In April of 2013, 3 years after LCD Dem was released, a message would appear on the official site, asking fans to forget it existed and to remove any content related to the game. Kurumba urging fans to never speak about the project again. By May, the project was completely removed from the site. But it wasn't just LCD Dem that was removed that year. His Bandcamp was wiped completely clean shortly thereafter. And later that year in September, we would also see the release of his final video. Yes, making these 4 songs not just the last tracks he made in Utau, but also the last songs of his entire career. No one really knew at the time, but this was the beginning of the end. A long 3-year period where Kurumba would delete everything he essentially ever made. His Bandcamp, SoundCloud, MySpace, Pixiv, just all slowly wiped from the face of the internet. But the biggest blow by far had to be the loss of his Nico Nico. In August of 2014, the account was just set to private, only to be completely deleted shortly thereafter, meaning over 150 videos were just completely erased from the surface of the internet. And while some of these songs have been recovered through the work of dedicated fans, the vast majority have unfortunately been lost to time. The only songs that would be officially released at this point were 2 compilations he put on his Bandcamp in June and August. Shortly thereafter, in September, he would take to Twitter to release the documents for the Sifu series. But with a catch. He stated it was okay to use the documents to produce audio and video, just to never credit him. This famously led people to stop using his name entirely, and instead opting to use various nicknames that you'll hear to this day. And at this point, it should have been clear to anyone that something seriously wrong was going on. But before anything could be answered, Kurumba deactivated the account. A month would pass, then half a year, then a full year would go by and still no word from Kurumba, until Christmas of 2015. He would return to Twitter once again re-releasing the documents for the Sifu series, while complaining of troublesome fans who hadn't been obeying his rules, classifying what was okay to write about related to his work. Then between the first couple of months of 2016, his Bandcamp was wiped clean again. And at the end of March, he would make a move that would shake his fandom to its core. Shortly after the deletion of his work, Kurumba announced that he would be retiring from the internet and had been considering taking his own life, saying that the promotion of the fans was the most painful part, that their selfish actions is what was killing him. These last string of tweets he published on April the 5th, 2016, would be his last known contact on the internet. So what in the world happened? Remember, by 2013, Kurumba had built a strong reputation for himself. He had not only created one of the most beloved Yume Nikki fan games, but it also played an active part in the development of Yume Tuki. And even if you disregard all of that, his music career on Nico Nico was just beginning to take off. To many, it seemed like he was just entering the peak of his career. So I think the amount of chaos and confusion that this statement caused was understandable. It really has seemed like it came out of left field. But what if I told you this may have been inevitable? As crazy as this sounds, I think Kurumba from the beginning loathed attention from the public. This was a musician known for working under multiple aliases, specifically chose abstract titles for his songs, and released virtually no information about himself. If you consider that 2012 to 2013 was also the period his content started to spread outside of Nico Nico, to me, it's all too much to be a coincidence. These were all moves to slow down the spread of his popularity. But why? This should have been any artist's dream. Well, that's the issue. No one really knows. But we can try to make an educated guess based on what he left behind. There's a ton of theories that have floated around about this over the years. One of the most popular suggests that LCD Dem could have been based on some past trauma that he had, that the game reflected some personal issues in his life that he simply regret putting out. Another theory states that he grew embarrassed of his previous work and just wanted to start off on a clean slate. But personally, I think the answer is even simpler than that. I don't doubt for a minute that Kurumba earnestly loved to create music and to share his art. After all, why put it out to the public then? But what I think he valued more than anything else was his privacy, and he never expected to gain the traction that he did. So, he panicked. And if he was dealing with any mental health issues at the time, it could have been overbearing. That would explain why at the end of that year he posted this statement on his Nico Nico, asking people to not promote his videos, to not tag his videos with the composer's tag, or to not publish his videos on the Nico Nico rankings. But if you know anything about the internet, is that when people are told to do something, they'll just do the direct opposite. And when demands don't work, you only have one option left: to delete everything. I had always had the mindset that when people are passionate about a piece of media, they would naturally want to learn more about who created it. After all, at the heart of this, that's pretty much what this channel is about. When we become passionate about a piece of media, we naturally want to learn more about that said individual or group. And as a result, it becomes common knowledge. But yet here's a producer pulling in millions of listeners that had virtually no presence on the internet. Listeners that I'm assuming the vast majority have no active knowledge of the background surrounding it, or who even created it. And even if they wanted to learn, there was no simple way of going about it. But if this video says anything, maybe it was just a matter of time. Believe it or not, you can actually still find all the original videos Chroma uploaded before they were deleted. The way Nico Nico works is that if you have the original SM number and an account on the site, you can still see all the statistics for that video. And it's almost humbling to see how much Chroma's legacy really has grown. But these aren't the view counts that I expected for songs that seemingly kickstarted a whole scene in Utau. So what gives? How could the view counts be this low, and why was accurate information so difficult to find? The answer is simple when you think about it. The explosion in popularity had to be recent. While Chroma did have a following on Nico Nico during his prime, it wasn't until nearly half a decade later that his popularity would actually skyrocket. A lot of this can be traced back to the sudden success of Sardine beginning in 2016. The song exploded in popularity, being used constantly on video sharing websites for MADs. And from there, it was only a matter of time before the other 3 tracks just joined in a similar fashion. But then something even more incredible happened. Singles, videos, albums, games that Chroma had once deleted started reappearing on the internet through the work of dedicated fans. In 2019, even a bootleg version of his voice bank has somehow floated its way across the internet. And it was beautiful to see how much these people cared about the work of just this one person. But also a little conflicting. If you're good at something, does that mean you should do it? Should you be placed on a pedestal, even if you didn't ask for it? There's always a certain amount of anxiety that goes into every video that I make. But with this one in particular, I went back and forth multiple times on whether I wanted to see it through. Because I knew the moment I started typing the script, I was betraying what Chroma treasured the most: to be left in peace and to be forgotten. So believe me, my dear viewer, the irony of this video is not lost on me. But I felt like the story needed to be told for a greater purpose. It's so easy to look at the life of someone like Chroma and say they have no right to complain because they're in this position that most of us can only dream about. But when you look at the amount of stress and harassment that these artists receive for just wanting to live a quiet and peaceful life, I don't think it's hard to see why music, or any public medium for that matter, couldn't be viewed as a profession for the insane.
You know, this is not one of those lifestyles that you envy, you know, where you're confined to this room.
There is something deeply unsettling about the way we treat our idols. But at the same time, I've always been a believer that as an artist, there's an unspoken pact you're signing when you decide to make your work public. That the moment you decide to put yourself out there, you have to be willing to say that I'm okay with being put in this spotlight. Because you have to realize no matter what you make, no matter how large or small, will always leave some sort of impact to the audience that experiences it. Some are gonna love it, others are gonna hate it. But most importantly for some, it's gonna serve as a source of motivation, of inspiration. So of course people will form an attachment to you, because now that piece of work is just as big of a part of their lives as it was for yours. And while there's nothing stopping you from erasing it, from hiding it from the public, there is one thing that you'll never be able to take back, and it's people's right to remember you. And I think that's the biggest mistake that Kurumba never realized, that once you leave an impact, you can never escape it. The purpose of this video isn't to take sides on this matter. If the internet has proven anything at this point, is that there is no simple right or wrong answer to this dilemma. Instead, I hope it can serve as a warning for any inspired artists out there. I'm not saying that you shouldn't share your passions or talents with the world, but before you do, honestly ask yourself, are you willing to accept the responsibilities that come with a decision like that? Because if the past has proven anything at this point, you won't be the one deciding when you get to step out of that spotlight. It's going to be your audience. Thanks for watching.
No biography of him should be done. There should be no documentary, because he would be deeply embarrassed and incensed by it. But I do understand there is a public interest. 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 There is a public interest.